And then as far as the other running backs go, absolutely not. I don't know. I don't want this backfield. I know Evan Hull had a great pass blocking rep the other day, and I think a lot of people are excited about Evan Hull and what he could potentially
Okay,
be.
hold on. There is nothing that makes people more excited than pass blocking reps.
I
That is
know.
like the number one thing. If someone does that, they are a superstar now. What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show. We'll be digging in deep on roster to discuss the impact of the 53-man roster cuts. But before we get into that, we got to talk about Trey Lance and get into the Trey Lance trade. He was traded to Dallas Cowboys for a fourth. QB3 on the roster right now behind Cooper Rush and obviously Dak Prescott. What is his impact? What is this impact to Trey Lance's value? Is he ever going to come back from this, Jeff? Or what does this deal look for you?
It's going to be interesting because this gives him a real developmental curve now, where I think when he was with San Francisco, the pressure to win with them immediately was massive on him. And this is a player that needs some time, and he needs to be in a system that supports him and will allow that development. I think a lot of what we saw in the play, you could see it. He was holding the ball when he needed to get rid of it. And I think he had such drilled in his head that he just needed to be perfect. And so he needs to get into a situation where expectations are minimal. He's resetting. He's in a good support system in Dallas. There's a lot of talent around him. In terms of, I don't imagine him. I mean, long term, he might be the replacement for Dak Prescott. That very well could happen. Or it could be a situation where, maybe he rebounds and builds some trade value. Maybe Dak misses a little bit of time and he looks good in a window, and the Cowboys can turn around and grab a first-round pick for him. So I think it was a low investment. I'm a little bit bummed out that he's not going to be a Buffalo Bill, to be honest with you, because their backup quarterback situation is an absolute trash fire. But good for you, Kevin, and I'm excited that Trey Lance gets to reset in a new opportunity.
Yeah, I think getting to a place that wants you is probably nice for him. I think, it was very clear that he wasn't happy there. He wasn't happy with the cards that he was dealt. And of course some of that was injury, but I have personally just not felt like he was offered a fair chance, even this offseason when they were saying that he was getting a fair chance. I just think that they had mentally already moved on to Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold. I think that they had kind of made that decision well before this trade happened. From a dynasty perspective, I think you look at the Jordan Love path and you say, well, maybe Lance can do something like that where you're holding, and then we're seeing that value realized this year, hopefully, with Jordan Love. But this timeline doesn't really make sense to me either. And so I'm curious as to what happens. Maybe maybe they do view him as an asset that they want on their team in case of a Dak injury, but also as Dak starts to age, maybe they extend him on a backup deal, and maybe that's Lance's path until maybe Dak is done. We have to remember this kid is still very young. He's 23 years old. And so there is a lot of football ahead of him. Jordan Love is finally taking over after 3 years on the bench, and he's 24 years old. So Trey Lance has a lot of football ahead of him. I think he's still going to have a long career. It might be as a backup for a little while, but I'm excited for the kid. I hope he gets an opportunity.
Yeah, I'm a little bit timid about this just because I don't think that coaching staff's going to be there very long. As a Dallas fan, I think McCarthy and Schottenheimer, those guys are on 1-year deals, and it's kind of like, hey, wait and see. And if that's the case, then we're really worried. But we know Jerry made this deal, so like, okay, Jerry's still there. So I think there's that in the back of the mind. I just don't know. I think that it's fine. I hope that he develops, and I hope he's there. We've beaten this horse now for the last feels like 3 off seasons and just talked about it. So now he's just that development, like that Jameis Winston without the starts in his career, kind of like, hey, what can he be? He's going to bounce around a little bit. But best case, he's Jordan Love. I see some talk about him replacing Dak. That's never going to happen unless Dak's injured. Like, that's not going to happen. Dak's their guy, and you see a little bit of that dynasty stuff going on out there. As far as the other side, real quick, Brock Purdy, dynasty impact. I've seen him go for some first recently in deals. So if you want to kind of get out of the Purdy train and kind of get some first and kind of go on that value, you can. I'm still not buying Purdy in dynasty. I think he was value, but I'm not buying him there. Are you, Jeff?
No, I mean, I think that the entry point for Brock Purdy, if you were on top of it, you hit that last year, and it's perfectly fine to get out of that. I'm still very skeptical. I think he can function within Kyle Shanahan's offense, and certainly the weapons there will allow him to be very fantasy relevant. Maybe. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo was flirting with being a quarterback one during stretches, but long term, they're not married to him long term. He's a 7th round pick. He's dirt cheap. If this goes sideways, there'll be Kirk Cousins or it'll be another veteran quarterback in there next year. And I think that's where I've seen it time and time again. I flash back to last summer where people were buying Davis Mills as this young potential Texans quarterback and saying, well, he's got Brandon Cooks and maybe Nico Collins will be something and they'll be trailing and maybe he's fantasy relevant. And now you can't even give the guy away.
I'm really happy you brought up Kirk Cousins. I think that is the end game with this team. Benjamin Solak from The Ringer wrote a fantastic article discussing, San Francisco's path to finding a quarterback and elevating this offense. It needs to evolve and it needs to change. Brock Purdy gives them a little bit of that. He has a little bit more mobility than Jimmy Garoppolo. He's really good on scramble plays. I think he gets out of the pocket and creates well. And that's something different, but it's not the end game for Kyle Shanahan. And I think that they're still going to be searching for their long-term guy. And for that, I think now is the time to get out on Purdy, because I also think that it could get a little ugly this year. I think he's set up to be okay, to be a fine QB2, but I think that there could be some stretches where you're like, is it Sam Darnold time? And I don't want to be holding in that instance.
Who lasts longer as their head coach, Mike McCarthy or Kyle Shanahan?
Kyle Shanahan.
Probably Shanahan.
Yeah, I think it's closer than people think, though.
Yeah.
I do think if the 49ers kind of fail, there's some weird rumblings going around there. It's living in California out here. I hear a lot of like the insider trading up here. There's some weird rumblings going on with the coaching staff, the ownership, all of that going on there. All right, before we go move on to kind of the deeper cuts, we got to talk about Jonathan Taylor. He landed on the PUP today, did not get traded. All accounts looks like he's going to be out for 4 weeks, and then don't know after that. They talked about maybe him getting traded at the deadline. Right now they have Evan Hull, Zach Moss, Deion Jackson back there. Are we buying Jonathan Taylor? Are we buying any of those other running backs in that room? Christian, what are we doing?
Yeah, I'll take Taylor. I mean, I think that obviously it's a hold. I'd look at Taylor as if I'm a rebuilding roster or I'm kind of like on the fringe. Now would be the time to just go in and get Taylor and, work towards that contender, maybe down the road, maybe next year. I don't think you can rely on having Taylor at any point this year. And then as far as the other running backs go, absolutely not. I don't know. I don't want this backfield. I know Evan Hull had a great pass blocking rep the other day, and I think a lot of people are excited about Evan Hull and what he could potentially be.
Hold on. There is nothing that makes people more excited than pass blocking reps. That is like the number one thing. If someone does that, they are a superstar now on social media, everything. You see it everywhere, though, with pass blocking. Like that matters.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. It matters a little bit.
It definitely matters a little bit, but also I don't think that this running back room is finalized. I think they probably add to the room, and so I'm out on that group. But yeah, give me Taylor. I'm interested to see where he lands, because I really just don't think he's going to suit up for the Colts ever again.
I think teams want to see him healthy, to be honest with you. I mean, he's sitting on PUP. He hasn't been in training camp. And if I were to give significant investment to trade for him and to give him a contract, I want to see him play. And I think that as he probably reached out to teams, I think that sentiment probably got back a little bit. So I do think that he will play again for the Colts. He's certainly not going to play within the first 4 games, but I could see a situation where, and I think the best time to sell a running back in the NFL is that right around that trade deadline where things start to get really hot and offenses are looking at themselves saying, we don't have a running back. We saw it last year with Christian McCaffrey, where we can add this guy into our offense. And those draft picks are so far away. We're pushing for the playoffs right now. We're pushing for a championship right now. Let's insert him into this offense. Let's lock down this division. And one of the hottest teams mentioned with him would be the Miami Dolphins. They're going to be in that very, very contested AFC East, and everybody in that division wants to win that division. So I could see a situation where maybe they're sitting 2 or 3 games back at the trade deadline and they say, hey, this will be the guy that will close this gap for us. And I think the Colts need to get him back on the field just to show, hey, he's over this, because his performance last year was not up to the standard of 2 years ago. And he got a lot of carries 2 years ago in that 2021 season when he went for those 2,000 yards. And we've seen running backs fall off a cliff when they have seasons like that. And so I think that has to be in the back of the mind of everybody that's going to trade for him and give him that contract, that, hey, is this one of those seasons that have broken guys in the past?
Yeah, I do think though for the next 2 years, maybe not this year, but a 2 year withstanding for Dynasty, he's a buy. Like I do think that if he finds himself in a roster, he's a solid running back too. What at best, like at worst, like in terms of that, if he gets the volume. In terms of just context for you guys out there, the most recent trade as of August 29th, Jonathan Taylor in a second for Travis Etienne and Terry McLaurin, and that's a 2025 second. So, I mean, it's interesting that side. I like ETN. I know Christian does not, but I like that
No,
side though. If you're
I
getting
would
out of it,
take. I mean, I would take ETN and McLaurin there if you're trying to win. I think this
yeah,
is the what I was talking about, though. I think
yeah.
that Taylor in 2025 second, that is probably your rebuilding team that's just going out and getting Taylor. So I get it, but
Yeah.
I'll take the ETN side there.
I do want to say something about him being a buy, because if you are, you're exactly right. If you are in a rebuild situation, he's not putting points on your roster right now, which is pushing you towards that higher draft pick. But you're going to have a sell opportunity on him before even, if he's traded before he takes the field. If he's traded to an offense like Miami or Philadelphia, that value on him is going to spike so high. He's going to be back to a borderline top 5 dynasty running back before he even steps on the field. And so it's a minimal risk investment. I mean, the only risk is that Jim Irsay just wants to watch him burn and keep him on pup all year long and say, hey, you don't want to play for us, you're not going to play football. And I think that is in play.
I can't wait for Arthur Smith to trade for him and they run the wishbone. That's what's probably going to end up happening for all of us out there, fantasy managers. But before you dive into kind of sleepers and teams and the releases that we saw today, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, never miss an episode there. Comment below with your questions. We appreciate all the fun comments that we've gotten over the last few weeks that we've been doing this show. So, hey, give us down there, give us some comments so we can kind of talk back to you guys.
Yeah, and also make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a premium subscriber. Elite subscribers get custom Dynasty content for less than $15 monthly or $70 annually. We have the best Dynasty content in fantasy football. Join us today.
All right, let's dive into the sleepers. Let's talk about some guys that made rosters that we're excited about, or, maybe not we're excited. Maybe, people are more excited than we are. Elijah Dotson, Chargers running back. Emmanuel Wilson, Packers running back. Jason Brownlee from the Jets, wide receiver. Jake Bobo. Everybody just loves Jake Bobo because it's a fun name to say for the Seahawks wide receiver room. Keaton Mitchell is the guy that we talked about. I think it was like, a month ago as a stash and a buy. And I think Jeff wrote something on him or he didn't. But Ravens running back made the team. Tyler Scott from the Bears. Andre oh man, Christian, you put him on there. Eusebius from Bengals wide receiver room, Jaleel McLaughlin from Broncos running back room, and then Malik Heath from the Packers wide receiver room. So give me your guy in this room, Christian. Go.
Oh gosh, there are a lot of people that I like. I talked about Jaleel McLaughlin last week, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, on the podcast version. Keaton Mitchell's the guy, though. I've actually really liked Keaton Mitchell from the jump. Like in this rookie class, he did a lot of things at Eastern Carolina. I think that from a pass catching perspective and what this Ravens running back room is going to look like this year, I think there's a lot riding on J.K. Dobbins being really good. And if J.K. Dobbins isn't really good, I think they give the other guys some run. Justice Hills look good. Keaton Mitchell has been super explosive when he's been on the field in the preseason. And I think that could develop into a role this year. He's still available in a lot of dynasty leagues. And so I think that that's what I wanted to highlight is you should go probably look at your waiver wire and see if you can go get one of those guys that we added, but specifically Keaton in this case, because I think that there's a real opportunity for a role here.
Yeah, I think the guy that all of the running backs, get all these running backs and put them on your roster over the wide receivers, because that we've seen time and time again, the path to running back relevancy, guy gets hurt, guy moves up the depth chart, maybe team changes the direction in the middle of the season, gives the young guy some opportunity, but making a roster, especially making a 53-man roster, and no teams, I don't think any teams kept more than 4 running backs, I don't believe. But we've seen some teams keep 2 running backs. And so this position is viewed as replaceable. And so being able to plug these guys in for dirt cheap, and we've had a string of players that have been held. We've had Kenyon Drake. People were holding Kenyon Drake. People were holding, obviously, Malik Davis was a hot name early in the season. Some of these guys that are on dynasty rosters, even still, you probably should have been reading training camp reports from Football Guys and you would have moved on from some of those had you consumed that content. But two, this is your opportunity. This is one of the biggest waiver runs in the league year to get these guys that made rosters, to make sure you actually have players that are going to play football on your dynasty rosters, and then kind of set yourself up for that season. So grab these running backs, but then looking at the receivers, I love Eusebius. And I look at that Cincinnati room. I think that Boyd will be gone next year, most likely. That's a big guy, physical guy that they can plug into there that can play interchangeably with Higgins and Jamar Chase, playing with Joe Burrow long term. I mean, that's what you want to look for at a wide receiver. You just want a freak athlete like that, or like Tyler Scott with Chicago. We've seen that talk about moving on from Darnell Mooney, potentially kind of leaked out this week that Darnell Mooney was in trade rumors. And if the Bears do fall out of it, it wouldn't be surprising to see Mooney traded towards in the middle of the season, towards the deadline, and Scott given a real opportunity. So that's a stash that can play out for you. But all these guys, this should be the bottom of your roster right now.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to point out one, Jaleel McLaughlin from the Broncos, like based on just price, like when you're just looking at that depth chart, he could easily just be the running back two above Samaje Perine. Injury withstanding, whatever the case, they seem to really like him in terms of what he's been doing on the field. Rushed 10 times the last preseason game, 48 yards and a touchdown, and they love him. They've talked him up, and I think he's kind of earned that spot. It looks like, and you could see a little bit more usage out of them, and he's free. Like some people are going to know about him, but in your non-deeper leagues, like, people are really using capital for like Perine, but not Jaleel. So that's something to note when you're looking at who you want to keep and who you're going to try to target with these guys. And like Jeff said, I mean, the wide receivers, we're going to see these names every year. Like, oh, okay, yeah, they're 5 or 6 and they just don't get out there. But these running backs can have immediate impact and they're free. And then you can use that value and kind of shape your team in terms of just, trading value, maybe plug and play if you need to. Some of these wide receivers, it's hard to say like, yeah, they're going to be there. Even, I know you like Iasovis, or, I just butchered that name. But what if Irv Smith performs really well, kind of like Evan Ingram did, and then Irv gets back, and now Irv's the third guy next year, and it's not there in that wide receiver room. So I think there's a lot of things to talk about when you're looking at the rooms as a whole.
I do want to mention, I did the Chargers camp reports, and so Elijah Dotson was somebody that came up quite a bit. And the approach the Chargers have talked about taking, Kellen Moore's talked about taking, is they want to focus a lot heavier on the run game than they have in the past. It's been one of the lightest run teams over the last couple of years. They think they have an offensive line that can play that run game, but all these backs are going to be involved. And so I think so often you're looking for the handcuff, that the guy that is going to increase value if Austin Eckler were to miss time. And maybe it's Joshua Kelly, but I think that Dotson has a real role without that happening. But if Eckler were to miss time, Dotson would spike in value. But I think that's a situation, and the Colt situation, where we're talking about like who would be the handcuff running back in this situation, and we're so ingrained in fantasy that there has to be that one guy that gets value and that you can put into your lineups. But the way that teams are building these backs and these running back rooms now, they're just going to use guys interchangeably. It's going to be like Bill Belichick going back to having a plow horse back and then a pass catching back. Now we're in the era of using 3 backs in that situation. And I think that is one of the biggest things that is not understood in fantasy football right now, the way that the NFL is headed, but getting 3 running backs involved in it, or even, I mean, the Eagles might use 4 running backs regularly. Yeah. And I think that's, talk about the Colts. And I think that offense is going to look a little bit like the 21 Eagles, where, yeah, Miles Sanders was the leading rusher, but you never felt good about putting Miles Sanders into your fantasy lineups. I think the Colts without Jonathan Taylor is that type of situation. And if Austin Eckler were to miss time, I think the Chargers could be that type of situation too.
Yeah. I wanted to add a name because I didn't add it before to the show sheet. Julius Chestnut. This is a name that we talked about last year as a potential sleeper. He didn't really make any waves. He was kind of behind Hassan Haskins. Hassan Haskins went on the commissioner's exempt list when we were recording this here on Tuesday. And so Julius Chestnut is that third running back to the point that if Derrick Henry goes down, I don't think Tajay Spears is getting all of the work. And so Julius Chestnut is one of those guys where you can seek that opportunity to gain value, and he's probably available. Though, if you were reading my camp reports for the Titans a couple of weeks ago, you probably would have added him back then because the signs were pointing to this, and he is that third running back. They only kept 3. So that's a guy I think that I'd be trying to nab in my dynasty leagues.
All right, let's jump into the teams, like team specific things that happen. I want to talk about the Cardinals, and I know like I get it. The tank is on. Caleb Williams is coming. Like I get that, but I do think it's important in dynasty leagues for superflex because we need quarterbacks, and I think when we have injuries, we're going to see that happen a lot. They released Colt McCoy. Poor Colt McCoy. He thought this was going to be his year, and it's not. Kyler's going to start on the pup, which was really no shock to anybody, in my opinion, that kind of understood this thing. I feel like Kyler was going to be on the pup. So you have Clayton Tune and Josh Dobbs. And Josh Dobbs was serviceable last year. We saw that. Are they viable at all as super flex? Or, I've talked about, I think I did a video for Football Guys almost 5 months ago about Clayton Tune being kind of, hey, could be that stash or whatever the case may be there. Are they viable? I think Dobbs is viable a little bit if you're in a pinch in terms of super flex and he has some value. What do you think, Jeff?
I mean, starting running backs do, and you're going to have game scripts that will favor them. I think that the offensive output, I mean, we've seen it before where some of these offenses are just so bad that they can't make anything happen. And, Hollywood Brown is still the type of player that one catch and he can score, and that can help the quarterback situation there. But Clayton Tune has gotten a lot of preseason steam, and especially in Superflex dynasty circles. But Dobbs is a guy that's sitting out there still on waivers. The Cardinals have not announced who's going to be their starting quarterback. If Tune's not that quarterback and they're going to go with Dobbs, one in my mind that tells me that I think they feel like Kyler might be back a little bit earlier, maybe, and they think that the veteran and Dobbs can keep them maybe bobbing above water. But two, I think that says that they're just not ready to put Tune out on the field, and so that's where it's just dirt cheap to get in there, because the entrance point on Tune is probably over. And realistically, if he is announced a starter, I think he's a sell, because there's no way. We know it's coming. You've got Caleb Williams coming, you've got Drake May coming, and you've got Kyler Murray still there. And people just love Clayton Tune, but we've seen time and time again, social media talk is cheap and action in dynasty leagues is not. And so that doesn't mean that people will actually trade for him.
Yeah, I don't see a world in which Dobbs actually starts. I think they added him because they wanted someone who could potentially take over. I think, Colt McCoy, I think the way they handled the Colt McCoy situation was pretty rough too. And, they kept him on the roster all of preseason. I know it's a business, but that's a veteran that was expected to be the starter. We kind of had an inkling that Tune would be. To me, not announcing the starter is saying I haven't actually seen Dobbs play that much in this offense, so I have no idea who the starter is going to be. I think Jeff's right. Anytime one of these guys, I think either way, if one of these guys gets on and someone actually is needing a quarterback, get off of these quarterbacks if you have them on your roster. To me, though, I think they are going to showcase Kyler a bit, because I do think that they're headed for Caleb Williams, and I think that's what they want to do. And so I think they need to showcase that Kyler is healthy, Kyler is ready to go, kind of like the Jonathan Taylor situation, because I think they need to find a trade partner to take on that contract that Kyler has. So I think that could put them out of the running for the Caleb Williams discussion, but also their over under in Vegas is like 3.5 now. It's the lowest in a long, long time since the expansion teams, I believe. So I think they're going to do just fine at trying to get Caleb.
I don't think Kyler Murray plays football this year, to be honest with you. I don't know. I'm skeptical on that front.
I think it's just the contract that's the kicker. I think when you're talking about Kyler getting moved on, it's a lot of dead cap. I mean, it's a dead salary when you're thinking of what they're going to have to do to move that contract. So I just think that, I don't know. I think it's interesting there. There's a bunch of other teams here, and I know we're running out of time, but the Jets Zonovan Knight was released. Jeff, what team stands out to you? For me, like if you look at the Cowboys, that running back room, or the Bucks wide receiver room, or even the Patriots only having 2 running backs, or any other guys here on the show sheet, what stood out to you about the decisions that they made?
I think Salvon Ahmed's position with the Dolphins is interesting to me, because we know that that's a potential high value backfield. And I expect they're going to run a true committee between Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert. And they listed that on their depth chart. That's how their depth chart shows it. They show 2 running back positions, both those guys. And then Ahmed is the only backup for either of those players. And so if one of those guys go down, and we're talking about Raheem Mostert and we're talking about Jeff Wilson, and they're neither of them are exactly the picture of reliability. And so I think there's huge opportunity for him, and so much of that has been put on Devon Achane, but I think they're going to be very, very slow with Achane. We saw that through the preseason, that I think it's as much as explosive as he brings to the offense. Ahmed has some of that in his game too, and he's very experienced.
Yeah, I think they had 5 running back. I think this decision was probably pretty difficult because Gaskin had his moments as well, but Ahmed certainly showed out in the preseason and earned that roster spot. To me, though, this is just one of those backfields that someone's going to produce each week. It's not something I really want to invest in, and so from a dynasty perspective, specifically, even Achane, I'm hesitant because I don't see a world in which this is one person's backfield, and I think that they want to use multiple backs in the passing game too. I don't think that there's a clearly defined role for everyone in this backfield. So good for Ahmed, because I think that when we were talking about these two players a couple of years ago when they first came into the league together, well, Gaskin was first, but I think Gaskin was the clear leader and Ahmed was that, oh, he looks pretty good out there, and seeing it flip, pretty cool.
Yeah. Let me see. Oh, Raheem Jarrett. I was gonna talk about him, Christian. He's out there. Raheem and Trey Palmer. I think that's interesting. The Bucks. I just don't know what that offense is gonna look like. I don't know necessarily. Like Jeff talked about bad offenses with the Cardinals. I think this could be also a bad offense. It really just depends on that quarterback play. But I think that it's their line. Their line is a mess. And when you're talking about who they're going to be missing and all of that, I think for me, like Raheem and Trey are interesting pieces because I think they're kind of deep there. And then the really quick before I let Christian talk about a team, Lions only keeping 2 running backs. All that tells me is Gibbs rocket ship to the moon. Like I think Gibbs is going to be used all over that field. That's what I wrote about him when I did my spotlight. I think pass catching, I do think he's going to get some red zone work. And I think that you're looking at a situation where Gibbs is a very, like, if you're in redraft, Gibbs is a safe pick to me where he's going that 4th round-ish, wherever he's at. And even then, like, I think in Dynasty, like you're talking about a guy that's probably going to be valued as a top 5 guy next year. He wasn't getting value like that in startups. He still wasn't. I think that you're looking at a very, very fun season for Jahmyr Gibbs.
I do want to mention a big low-key winner today that I have not seen mentioned. Greg Dulcich, I think, was a big low-key winner because the Broncos only kept 4 wide receivers, and one of those players is Jerry Jeudy, and we don't really know what his timeline for recovery is. They traded Albert Okwuegbunam, and I butchered that name, but Alberto was traded to the Eagles, and that's an interesting situation for him because they didn't really have that second pass-catching tight end, but it's more interesting for the Broncos because they've got a lot of blockers on that team, fullbacks and tight ends, and not a lot of pass catchers. And Dulcich is definitely one of those pass catchers. He's been viewed as a big loser through this preseason after people saw Adam Troutman listed first on that depth chart. But when you look at who's going to get those targets in Denver, unless they go exclusively to Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims, if Jerry Jeudy's out, I don't think that situation is going to happen. And I think he's a player that had a quiet, very good day.
Yeah. I'm going to run it back really quickly, back to the Bucks. So the reason Raheem Jarrett and Trey Palmer got brought up, they only kept 5 receivers, and 2 of them are Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And we kind of know that what the dynasty perspective and dynasty outlook on that was. And so now 5 receivers, it's still a decent sized number. A lot of teams only keep 5 receivers, but when Raheem Jarrett or Trey Palmer is your 3, I think you're looking at a very clear window or opportunity to gain value in those 2 players. The one team I did want to mention, because there was a lot of debate. I know Daniel Harms here at Football Guys had a lot of discussions about this. He's a Chiefs guy. 7 wide receivers for the Chiefs. Justin Ross made the 53. They kept 7 wide receivers for the first time, I believe, in the Andy Reid era. So that's a big deal that Justin Ross made the team. However, it sounds like there's a chance that he's the 7th. And so I want to put context to that. I think, they kept Kadarius Toney, they kept Justin Watson, they kept Richie James, who apparently has kind of leapfrogged Rashee Rice on the depth chart based on what we saw in the final preseason game. There's a lot of mouths to feed there, but yeah, good for Justin Ross. Really, really happy that he made that roster.
The Chiefs wide receiver room is just like the Dolphins running back room. They're going to produce, but you're not going to be relying on them moving every week. And I do think James is going to be target. Like, I do think James has that ability to get in there. I'm not on the Ross train. Ross is being touted as this guy, and which is happy. I'm happy he made the roster, but his dynasty value is not reflecting what people are talking about with him. So, like, that's just one of those things you want to hold. That's fine. But this is what you get with him this year, I think. And I don't see it moving anywhere there. So anything else, Jeff, before we move on?
Just real quick, I think you made good points on Ross, but I do want to mention we're going to have a year here of Sky Moore of solidifying himself as a key component in that offense, and I think he's going to be the second target in that offense. And then when Kadarius Toney is available, he'll be on that list too. Justin Ross, long term, I think projects into the roles taken by Justin Watson and Marcus Valdes-Scantling. And if you didn't realize that Justin Watson and Marcus Valdes-Scantling are the full-time starting wide receivers for the Chiefs, that tells you everything you need to know long term about Justin Ross's potential probably position.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about some guys that got released that we're going to pour one out for them today because they're probably done. Their dynasty value is there. Robbie Chosen Anderson, Malik Davis, Deneric Prince, who was getting a little bit buzz preseason, but that didn't happen. Elijah Higgins as well. We've heard a lot of buzz out of him. Like maybe you should draft him over Chig. I didn't think that was appropriate. And then Bailey Zappi, he also got cut. So anything, any parting words for any of these dynasty pieces, Jeff, that you want to shout out?
I mean, watch tomorrow at noon because waivers run tomorrow at noon. And so if one of these guys get picked up, I mean, Higgins is a player that's transitioning positions. And even if he were to do that well, the Dolphins offense doesn't throw to tight ends. And so that wasn't the prime spot that people thought it might be. And so, but just kind of watch tomorrow and you're going to have waiver runs tonight. You should target those guys that actually did make teams and might actually play football this year tonight. But on that secondary waiver run, if these guys are picked up and put into positions like we mentioned, multiple of these teams only kept 2 running backs, and so Zonovan Knight, Malik Davis, those are the types of Deneric Prince are the types of players that could slide in there as that third back maybe.
Yeah, I'm curious. I don't have much to say about these players. I'm curious what the Patriots are going to do to get a second quarterback on the roster. I think they're hopeful that Bailey Zappi and Malik Cunningham or one of the two make it through waivers, which I think could very well happen. Bailey Zappi being waived is one of the most shocking things that I saw this week because I just, he started games last year. Like he played in meaningful football games last year. So I wonder if this is an ode or a nod to Mac Jones to say, what, you're the guy. Yeah. Literally, you're the only one, so you have to be the guy. But overall, Malik Davis, none of these guys move the needle for me. These are the guys that I would replace on the bottom of my roster with the sleepers that we talked about at the beginning of this episode.
I want a wild hypothetical. Maybe conversations have happened with Carson Wentz and Bill Belichick, and maybe that's a situation where Belichick has said, hey, let's wait until after week 1, week 2, and we'll bring you in and give you a nice landing spot and kind of set you up in a nice position. Because I think had Mac Jones gone down, I think that they knew their season was done, but that's potential out there. But Zappi's going to get claimed. I'd have to imagine somebody's going to claim him just if somebody just wants intel on but second quarterback situation is pretty bad across the league.
The 49ers should claim him. They should put him on their depth chart out there. Now, I think
the last point Raiders probably take him for Brian Hoyer. So
the last point I want to point out real quick, I think if Mac Jones, if this is that, that thing to him saying, hey, you're our guy, he could turn into be that very over the offseason, we saw him his dynasty value really get shifted down. He could be that, solid QB2 on some builds out there that you guys probably built with a top quarterback, an elite quarterback. What I had saw, in mocks that Jeff doesn't like, but even in underdog, some of that other stuff out there, you get those top 4 top quarterbacks. And then, one of them, you pair Allen with, Mac Jones. That's a pretty solid floor. Maybe Mac could have that. And that maybe you can win your league with those guys, which at the beginning of the offseason, we didn't even know Mac was going to what is Bailey Zappi? What does this look like? Now it looks like Mac maybe going to come from that offense. We see this kind of taking shape in terms of that. It's hard to trust that offense. They don't have a ton of pieces, but maybe he's just that solid piece there. So yeah, that's our take on all of these kind of breakdowns, the cuts, the releases, and Lance and Taylor. So we appreciate you guys tuning in.
And the full version of every show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Head to your favorite podcast app and download, subscribe, get in on the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show today.